All right. So the last two evenings we've been focusing concerning the natural knowability of God. 2 days ago we considered the statement that God, our Creator and Lord, can be known with certainty by the natural light of reason from created things. And it is also likewise a matter of faith that approximates this, is that the existence of God can be proved by means of causality. We talked a little bit about the nominalists and so on and so forth. Tonight we're looking at some of the errors regarding the natural knowability of God. First is that of traditionalism. Traditionalism, which developed as a reaction against the rationalism of the Enlightenment, proceeds from the view that God, in a comprehensive primitive revelation, bestowed on man simultaneously with speech a sum of religious and moral basic truths, which have been reproduced in mankind through tradition. General reason, or common sense, guarantees the unfalsified transference of the original heritage of that revelation. The individual receives it through oral teaching. Reason cannot achieve of itself the knowledge of the existence of God. This is a claim of skepticism. The knowledge of God is, like every religion and moral knowledge, a knowledge of faith. The chief opponents of traditionalism, in its strict form, names I can't pronounce, it was represented in a moderated form by two other names I cannot pronounce, and this theory was condemned by Pope Gregory XVI and by the First Vatican Council. So it looks like this idea is that we cannot, by means of reason, come to know God. But we could, because God at some point in the past revealed these things, and then it's traditioned down, and so it's something we learn from somebody else. The error that's embedded in this is the rejection of that we can come to know God, which is a denial of the by the natural light of reason from created things, that God can be known with certainty. And by certainty, we mean reasonable certainty, right? We understand it's something that we reason to. Right? The semi-traditionalists of the school of Lao admit, indeed, that natural reason from the contemplation of natural things, right, can with certainty recognize the existence of God, but only on the supposition that it has already, through instruction, imbibed the idea of God originating from the primitive revelation. So, obviously, we're looking at basically the same error, but it speaks a little bit more positively concerning natural reason, except that the idea must once again be traditioned, but then reason can, with that information, know with certainty. So apparently, even with the traditionalists, they were much more skeptical, even in receiving the information. It's a strange idea to even talk about because it's not something that's really popular in our day and age. But maybe it could become something popular later in the future. It certainly was at one time, and so it's noteworthy here. Traditionalism is to be rejected on philosophical and theological grounds. Language does not generate concepts, it presupposes them. All right. And second, acceptance of the revelation presupposes, according to reason, knowledge of the revealing God and the certain conviction of the truth of his testimony. Right, so, See if I can distill that a little bit. The first part is pretty obvious. Language presupposes concepts, right? Language conveys meaning of a concept that already exists. I'm trying to think of why this would be relevant here, other than by learning of something tradition to us. Maybe it's looking at that language as being the originator of the concepts. I'm not sure. This is perhaps too brief for an adequate exploration here. In acceptance of the revelation, right? Even if it's traditioned, and somebody says, "Oh, this comes from God," right? Which kind of sounds like the Christian revelation, but there's a distinction here. Obviously, where we're looking at the that this is being said to be true in place of natural reason being able to discover it on its own, apart from it being traditioned to us, right? And that's kind of the point. But even in this conception, if you receive something, there's still the problem that, according to reason, that we must have knowledge of the revealing God to even accept anything that could supposedly come from him. So, like, for example, if we were to take up and read the Old Testament and see how God revealed himself in the Old Testament, the revelation that is contained therein presupposes the God who reveals all of that stuff. And so in the order of reason here, we are first conceptualizing a God who reveals himself, and then we examine the content of that revelation. The second error along these lines is atheism. The systems of agnosticism, skepticism, and Kantian criticism deny the certain knowability and the demonstrability of the existence of God, but can be associated with the belief in a divine being. They are based on the principle, we do not know, and we shall not know. Negative atheism is inculpable ignorance regarding the existence of God. Right. Positive atheism, that is materialism or a form of pantheism, directly denies the existence of a supramundane personal divine being. This was condemned by the Vatican Council, and rightly so. As far as the possibility of atheism is concerned, it cannot be denied that there are atheistic doctrinal systems, materialism, pantheism, and practical atheists, that is, people who live as if there were no God. The possibility that there are also subjectively convinced theoretical atheists is founded in the spiritual and moral weakness of man, and on the fact that the proofs of God are not immediately, but only mediately evident. But as the knowledge of God can easily be gained from the contemplation of nature and the life of the soul, it will not be possible permanently to adhere to an honest and positive conviction of the non-existence of God. An inculpable and invincible ignorance regarding the existence of God is not possible for a long time in a normal, grown-up person, in view of the faculty of the natural knowledge of God attested in Holy Scripture and in tradition. So this is interesting in terms of invincible ignorance. So as a child, I certainly was, for all intents and purposes, I was raised in a home that didn't really mention God that much, so we lived a kind of practical atheism. It never developed into a full-blown theoretical system until I started dabbling with the idea of not existing, which in a sense doesn't necessarily, upon my death, I should say, to clarify, which doesn't necessarily deny the existence of God, but it wasn't a matter of contemplation. But children, especially at this point, I was just reaching the age of reason, all right, and I was newly contemplating things. I certainly could be said to be invincibly ignorant. I had not yet began to contemplate such things. But as I got older, the notion of God is something that just seems to be so, that presses itself upon the mind. Obviously, the point that's being made here is that a grown-up who has fair reason really can't go a long time, without and still remain invincibly ignorant that God exists, right? As if somehow no notion of God has ever reached him. His reason never went there. All right, I doubt there are many who remain in such a state, and so I think it's fair to say, as Romans says, that we are without excuse. We are without excuse. We can certainly keep open the possibility of invincible ignorance, but the level of culpability there, I think, is pretty clear from Romans. Yeah. Hey, Jedi, welcome in. Also, we're looking at Immanuel Kant's critique. What Kant, in his pre-critical period, recognized the possibility of the proofs of God, and even developed the ideological proof of God, an article which he published in 1763, and saying the only possible ground of proof for a demonstration of the existence of God, which he thought was the case. Now, in his critical period, he denied the validity of all proofs of God, such as in his book Critique of Pure Reason, which appeared in 1781. So there was about roughly 20 years between this, right? At one point he was willing to grant the possibility of a proof, and then he came to reject his only the only possibility that he was willing to grant. According to Kant, the only object of theoretical reason is the world of phenomena. The supersensual is withdrawn from it. To better understand this aspect, is he in his epistemology, in Kantian epistemology, there's a distinction between the pneuma and the phenomena. The pneuma is said to be what a thing is, and the phenomena is merely the impression or appearance of the thing. I mentioned before that in his skepticism, he came to reject that we can come to know what a thing is in itself, but rather would posit that we only receive impressions of the phenomena. All right, so it's not so much the mind really comprehending all that the thing is, but rather through sense experience. More like an object being pressed up against clay. It impresses itself. Reality impresses itself upon us, but it's not the thing itself. There isn't a direct correlation, I should say, of the thing that's outside of the mind with the thing that is inside of the mind. Okay, just to be clear. The validity of the principle of causality is limited to things perceptible to the senses. In this case, in order to refute the individual proofs of God's existence, Kant sought to show that they all go back to the ontological argument, by deriving from the concept of the supreme reality its factual existence. Nevertheless, Kant believed in the existence of God and designated this belief the postulate of practical reason. Kant's philosophy exercised a decisive influence on the Protestant theology of the 19th century. From the standpoint of the Kantian doctrine of cognition, it rejected the rational foundation of religion, and with it the intellectual proofs of the existence of God, and taught that religious truths must be perceived, not by reason, but through religious feeling, which affirms the existence of God and by which we live in God. Right. They claim that it is on this subjective religious experience that faith is founded. The consequence is a sharp separation of the spheres of knowledge and of faith, which is problematic. This reminds me of the idea of fideism, which isn't here mentioned, but it's the notion that we can only know that God exists by faith. We have to just believe that he's there. Reason can't take us there. Reason can't demonstrate his existence at all. And that's because, in this sense, faith has been divorced from reason. Just give me a second, Jedi. Faith has been divorced from reason. One document that's actually really good by John Paul II, we may even read through it sometime on stream because it's that good, is Fide et Ratio, which means faith and reason. It's an encyclical that he did, and it explains the relationship of the two together. That obviously we have an intelligible faith. Faith in an object that is an object of faith, something that is objectively outside of ourselves, and that we can come to know that thing by reason. And that faith illumines this, obviously, as grace restores and builds upon nature. And so faith likewise sheds light on things, making it allowing us to reason more with ease and to more readily bring us to those conclusions, even if we had not yet reasoned there, we eventually will. There's certainly a danger in our day and age in subjective religious experience. We've talked about spiritual warfare before. We've talked about testing the spirits. We need objective content by which to do this. And this cannot be based on another layer of subjectivity of something someone might just say concerning religious faith. And so what ends up happening, people will have experience. There's an association of ideas and concepts that ends up being associated with it. Then those are absorbed as being true, even though they're not being reasoned through. And so it becomes very subjective. which makes it very shaky for when they no longer have said religious experiences. They may be more likely to abandon the ideas, or in the midst of argumentation, they're not open to critiquing the idea because in their mind they had the experience is undeniable, and these ideas therefore are simply true, and there's no need to give any kind of rational defense of them, which is certainly a mistake. We should be able to reason concerning all matters concerning the faith, right? Which is an actual content, like when Jude talks about the faith which was once and for all given unto the saints. It's actual content, right? Let's see. Could the right approach be the right prayer request? God, if you are true, can you please show me? I mean, those types of prayers of like, God, if you are there, please reveal yourself to me, I think flow from a heart that's actively seeking him, which is evidence and proof of grace working within us. Okay? It's an act of faith even to do that. Even in doing that, we are acting like he is there. We are treating him like he exists. Isn't that nice of us? Right? Isn't that nice of us to treat he who is existence himself as if he exists, but for a moment, right? We're very, very generous. Greetings. Welcome in. All right, and the fourth, and the closing portion here, the cognitional theoretical basis of modernism is agnosticism, according to which human rational cognition is limited to the world of experience. So this is basically the whole foundation, or the product of modern philosophy leads us into a kind of post-modern age, where once again we are basically swimming without certainty. You think? Yeah, well. Religion, according to this theory, develops from the principle of vital immanence, or immanentism. That is, from the need for God which dwells in the human soul. The truths of religion are, according to the general progress of culture, caught up in a constant substantial development, or a kind of evolutionism when it comes to the human soul. I wish he said more here on this point of modernism, because he simply states the principle of vital immanence, but doesn't quite explain it in a way that I can elaborate on it further. So hopefully he'll at some point talk about the modernists in a little bit more, but I think in general they speak in terms of progress or development of truths in such a way that things that used to be true are actually found not to be true. This can be shown forth in the traditional conception of the Eucharist as being really, truly, and substantially the presence of Christ, body, soul, blood, and divinity. And a modernist approach to this is simply to be rejected, to distill it down from a reality to merely an act of faith on the part of the individual, as if it isn't so much that it is the body and blood of Christ objectively. It is the body and blood of Christ to him simply because they bring some sort of religious experience to the moment, kind of thing. That's one way I've come to understand this idea of vital immanence. But I'm also going to have to claim a measure of ignorance here. I wish I understood this particular point better. But let's see. So you can't even imagine the feeling a person who believes all I see is all there is as a materialist. There can only be a feeling like being sucked into a black hole. Well, I mean, we've had conversations before in the past, haven't we? Concerning that constant staring into the abyss. Why is it when I imagine a God, I feel better as a person? Always did. I think that the reason for it is because everything that we observe and can be observed is contingent. So it isn't an explanation for itself. And when something doesn't have an explanation for itself, it doesn't derive its meaning from something. So in a sense, in a non-theistic philosophy, it's not there because it was purposed there. It's supposedly there without purpose, which is kind of interesting. One would think there'd be a sufficient reason for why a thing is what it is, opposed to being anything else. So for some people, perhaps they may have a notion of God, but it's associated with punishment and it's associated with punishment, misconceptions, distortions, and so maybe the idea of a God could actually terrorize somebody. You know what I mean? Something like that.